Thanks for tuning in to 5 While You Drive, an American Daily Press podcast, where we bring you 5 trending topics to listen to on your daily commute. Today is September 18th, 2024. The top story this morning: thousands of members of the Islamic terrorist organization Hezbollah were injured yesterday when all of their pagers simultaneously exploded. Hezbollah officials claim that 9 people were killed and 2,800 people were injured, including Iranian ambassador to Lebanon, Mojtaba Amani. While no one has claimed responsibility for this event, Hezbollah blames Israel. So how did all the pagers explode at the same time? Details are scarce right now, but the leading theory is that malware installed on the pagers caused the lithium batteries to overheat and then explode. That, or the devices were all either obtained from the same distributor or intercepted, perhaps by Mossad, during transit and modified, knowing ahead of time that only Hezbollah members would be using them. At the very least, this was a deliberate act, and it goes without saying that Hezbollah's supply chain has been infiltrated. IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is in the news again. Boy, strap in for this one. There was a vote in the Senate yesterday on a bill that purports to expand access to IVF. If you're wondering why such a thing is coming up right before the election, so were all the Senate Republicans, who by and large support IVF. Nevertheless, all but 4 of them voted against the bill, calling it federal overreach. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas introduced a separate pro-IVF bill that would withhold Medicaid funds from states that ban IVF. But interestingly enough, the Democrats blocked that one, with Washington Senator Pat Murray saying, quote, "This bill is silent on fetal personhood, which is the biggest threat to IVF," end quote. And there we have it. Fetal personhood. When does a person become a person? According to current U.S. laws, it's when they're born. You're starting to see the real issue here. This furor about IVF all stems from the recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling that said that frozen, fertilized embryos legally count as children. Now, that decision worries some IVF advocates, since IVF creates more fertilized embryos than patients intend to use. And that being so, patients, the advocates posit, would have to pay indefinitely to store the so-called extra embryos to prevent the deliberate discarding, freezing, and experimental manipulation of human beings at their earliest state of development. Democrats are seeking to put Republicans on defense with this issue, with the election now less than 50 days away. And since we're already in this particular field of politics, let's talk about abortion bans. Specifically, let's talk about the story coming out of Georgia, where young mother Amber Nicole Thurman died from complications resulting from a medically induced abortion. This one's a little tough to go through because of the sensitive subject matter, but it needs to be heard. Vice President Harris has blamed, quote, "Trump abortion bans" for the death of Ms. Thurman. The talking point echoed across the headlines is that Georgia's abortion ban is what delayed life-saving care for Ms. Thurman, making her death a preventable one. But that's not entirely true. Let's take a look at what actually happened. Ms. Thurman, who was 9 weeks pregnant with twins, drove to a clinic in North Carolina where she was given the abortion drug mifepristone, which she took. She drove back to Georgia and took the second drug, misoprostol, at home the next day. Everything that follows is a direct result of taking those drugs. On August 18th, she went to the hospital, where she was bleeding and vomiting blood. She presented with abdominal tenderness, critically elevated white blood cell count, low blood pressure, foul-smelling vaginal discharge, and an ultrasound showed she had retained tissue in her uterus. Now, let's pause for a moment, because according to medical experts, the standard of care for treatment here would be immediate antibiotics and D&C, dilation and curettage, or however that's pronounced. Here's where facts begin to separate from the headlines. Georgia's law does not criminalize doing a D&C. What Georgia's abortion law does say is, quote, "No abortion shall be performed if the unborn child has a detectable human heartbeat, except in the event of a medical emergency or medically futile pregnancy," end quote. There is no heartbeat at this point. The babies have been killed, and the mother is now suffering from endometritis and possible sepsis. So what happened? Did the hospital refuse to do the D&C because of a fetal heartbeat? No. They instead sent her to the ICU, where they started her on antibiotics. A couple of hours later, Ms. Thurman's labs came back and showed that she was in the early stages of multi-system organ failure. Standard of care for this? Any guesses? That's right, D&C, which again did not happen. She doesn't even make it to an operating room until almost 20 hours after she arrived at the hospital, where she died on the operating table. Was her death preventable? Yes. Did she die because of an abortion ban? No. Speaking of Capitol Hill, the House will vote today on a 6-month stopgap funding bill. What makes this bill special is that it's linked to legislation requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. House Speaker Mike Johnson said, quote, "Congress has an immediate obligation to do 2 things: responsibly fund the federal government and ensure the security of our elections. Because we owe this to our constituents, we will move forward on Wednesday with a vote on the 6-month CR with the SAVE Act attached," end quote. That's a little optimistic there, Mike. This same packaged deal was pulled off the floor last week when it looked like there was too much GOP opposition, mostly because many members oppose CRs, or continuing resolutions. Even if this does get pushed through the House, it likely won't make it through the Senate. It's all posturing. The government is facing a potential shutdown on October 1st if a spending bill doesn't get passed, and trying to tack on the SAVE Act is certainly a gutsy move, but it likely won't work, especially since President Biden says if that bill comes across his desk, he will veto it. We're a little short on time this morning, so this next story is going to be a little brief. Everybody loves a comeback story, or so they say, and Amazon's CEO Andy Jassy loves them too. That's why he's requiring all employees to come back to the office 5 days a week. That's right, starting January 2nd of next year, assuming the asteroid hasn't come yet, Jassy says, quote, "Our expectation is that people will be in the office outside of extenuating circumstances," end quote. So I guess that means the pandemic is finally over? Somebody better tell Dr. Fauci. Thanks for listening today to 5 While You Drive. We hope you enjoyed your stay. If you like what you heard, give us a follow on X, or you can visit AmericanDailyPress.com. If you have any feedback for the show, you can send us an email at 5drive, that's the number 5 and the word drive, at AmericanDailyPress.com.